Game tonight with the league MVP, and I have this assembly ready to talk about it. But that is not where we begin this morning. We have huge breaking news, and for that, let us bring in our basketball guys. Jay Will is here to analyze, but Adrian Wojnarowski, the man himself, has an enormous story that I think has implications for the moment and extending all the way to next summer. Woj, the stage is yours.
Greedy, Bradley Beal, the all-star guard in Washington, has agreed to a 2-year, $72 million max contract extension. His agent, Mark Bartelstein, tells me this morning that keeps him under contract with a player option in 2022, 2023. That keeps him now under contract and out of free agency for the next 3 years. It is a remarkable commitment from Beal to an organization that is in a downturn now. Ted Leonsis, their owner, Tommy Shepard, their new GM, sold Beal in these last few months on a future in Washington, and he can opt out of his deal in 3 years, and if he re-signs in Washington, could sign the biggest deal in league history. 5 years, $266 million. But the ripple effects are felt all over the league because this was a player who contenders, there's not a team in the league who didn't want to get involved in a Bradley Beal trade scenario. Now he is, that conversation will not happen. He is committed to Washington, and this is a great day for the Wizards.
No question about it. So there's so much to unpack in this story. Let's briefly start there. We are living in a time where star players are forcing their way out of good teams, much less teams that are struggling. So this is quite a statement that Bradley Beal is making about Washington.
It's a massive statement for the Wizards and Tommy Shepard. So my thing is, in an age where Kevin Durant leaves Golden State, you have Kawhi that leaves Toronto after winning a championship. Now you're having Bradley Beal say, I want to stay here in D.C. And actually, he didn't counter at all throughout the course of the year. He said, this is going to be a year of patience. I have to reevaluate all my decisions, but I want to be here. That says huge statement for the Washington Wizards.
Look, I mean, we're at a time where football players are forcing their way out of teams they don't want to be on anymore. So Bradley Beal makes the huge commitment to stay in Washington. They'll rebuild around him. In the meantime, let's put some names to the teams that you think are very disappointed this morning, Woj. Who is it out there that thought they were very much in contention to get Bradley Beal and thought he was the missing piece for a championship?
Well, certainly the Miami Heat have been a team that would have loved to have gotten him. The Lakers, teams like the Clippers, the Brooklyn Nets, the Boston Celtics, anybody who has assets eventually would have tried to get involved in Washington with Bradley Beal. Teams have been calling for months. When Tommy Shepard took over this team in July as GM from the interim job, this was something no one saw coming. The feeling around the league was eventually Beal would push his way out like a lot of other players had. But Mark Bartelstein told me this morning, from the very beginning, Bradley Beal told him, I want to make it work in Washington. And Bartelstein, Beal, Ted Leonsis, Tommy Shepard, multiple meetings over the last few months, and Leonsis, Shepard sold him on a vision of rebooting this organization. Remember, they still have John Wall on a massive contract. He is probably going to miss this whole season, but there's some young pieces there, Thomas Bryant, who they will start to try to reshape this roster around.
So let's just think this through for a moment here. There are no huge free agents that we expect to be available next summer. Take the name Anthony Davis out of that. He's not going anywhere. He's staying in L.A. So this was the big fish that everyone was waiting for, and now he is no longer available for other teams. So this, I think, really does reshape a lot of people's plans right now.
Think about the best backcourts in the NBA. When you think about Steph and Clay, when Clay comes back, Dame, CJ, you will put John Wall and Bradley Beal in that conversation when John Wall comes back. The East is open, guys. I mean, Milwaukee's good. They're the same team as they were last year, minus Malcolm Brogdon. They still have some good pieces. You think about, what's happening in Toronto. They're kind of on a downturn. Philadelphia, it could be an implosion year for them if they don't win the whole thing. It could be open for Washington to regroup and regather.
And just very quickly, and math has never been my strong suit, but when you and I were briefly catching up on this before we came out here, you mentioned the extension he could sign if he gets to his 10th year would be 5 years.
$260.
$260?
Oh.
$266 million. That would be the biggest deal in league history. If he left, went somewhere else, 4 years, about $200 million.
I would say 2.
I'm proud to tell you, I didn't need to use a pencil to figure out that's $53 million and change per year.
That would be the biggest contract.
It would be the biggest ever.
Yes.
Jay, Will, $53 million a year for a basketball player. I don't even know what to say. Anyway, that is enormous news this morning. Outstanding work as always. Woj dropping the news as we begin our show today. Bradley Beal staying in Washington. The long faces are in the front offices of a lot of other teams around the NBA. More on that as we go. Meanwhile, it has been an up and down season so far for Patrick Mahomes. Through 3 weeks, he led the NFL with almost 1,200 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, no interceptions. Typical Mahomes. Chiefs won all those games and then won again in Week 4, despite Mahomes being held without a touchdown. Then in Week 5, they lose to the Colts. He re-aggravates a left ankle injury that he'd originally suffered in the season opener against the Jaguars and clearly does not look himself. He was able to play the following week in the showdown game against Deshaun and the Texans, but Kansas City suffered its second straight home loss after starting 4-0, and Mahomes did throw his first interception of the season. And so there was this sort of feeling out there across the NFL that there's a blueprint now for how to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, who will start the NFL weekend tonight, as mentioned, at Denver in a divisional game. So, D. Wood, right now, I never would have thought I'd hear myself say this, but does this feel like a very important game for Kansas City on the road?
Absolutely. You've lost 2 straight home games, and now you're coming up against a divisional opponent in Denver Broncos who's also won 2 games. So the Kansas City Chiefs, their defense, they can't stop the run at all. They're 30th in rush defense. Phillip Lindsay is getting back on track. So, and the Denver Broncos defense is playing pretty good football. So this is a game that everyone needs to watch for.
Yeah, to me, the Broncos smell blood in the water. And Greeny, in football, a lot of it is, do we even have the talent to beat this team? Teams go into games against the Chiefs realizing, man, we ain't got it. We ain't got what it takes. If I'm the Broncos and any other team, you're seeing the Chiefs have lost 2 straight games. I smell blood in the water. Now's the time to attack.
You know, I think that there was a feeling coming into this season that the AFC was a 2-horse race, that it was New England, it was Kansas City, and everyone else was trying to figure out where they fit into that. Patriots have held up their end of the bargain. Are the Chiefs that team right now? Are the Chiefs on a level with the Patriots, or are they closer to everybody else?
I think I'm not ready to write the Chiefs off just yet. I think when they are healthy, I still have the Chiefs right there with the Patriots.
My problem is that's such a big if. You know, you can't recover from an injury midseason. Most of all players are to some degree hurt, but it matters when it's your quarterback. Greeny, when it's Patrick Mahomes, he started off the season, I believe, 11 touchdowns through 4 games, something along those lines. He has 4 touchdowns in the last 3. He's ailing, and the Chiefs go as Pat Mahomes goes.
And even take that out of the equation. Look at the lay of the land. The last 2 weeks did significant damage. Those were home losses to teams that they could face in the playoffs, in Indianapolis and Houston, that they could conceivably be in a situation where they're in a tiebreaker and one of them gets the 2 seed and a bye, and the Chiefs have to take the 3 seed and a wild card game. So those are 2 bad losses that are going to stick regardless of how healthy he is.
That is our NFL insider extraordinaire, Dan Graziano, and I want to spin this to the other important piece of this game tonight. If the Chiefs lose, then everything feels up for grabs. If the Broncos lose, which I think is the more expected outcome here, Denver then falls to 2-5, and we will be about a week and a half away from the NFL trade deadline, and the name Von Miller, superstar pass rusher, will start to be spoken very loudly in league circles.
There are a couple people on Denver's roster that trades teams have an eye on for trade acquisitions, but obviously the biggest one would be Von Miller. It's a very interesting situation. Denver is telling teams at this point he is not available, but you mentioned we're still 12 days away. 3-4 days ago, Jacksonville was telling teams Jalen Ramsey wasn't available. Now he's on the Rams. So things do change. Von Miller, 2 years left on his contract, but they're both team option years. It's $17.5 million each season, and it's a contract that people could take on. He's a 30-year-old pass rusher who had 14.5 sacks last year, still productive, reasonably priced.
He's 30 years old.
Yes.
Jalen Ramsey just went for 2 number 1s. He's a lot younger. What is the price tag would you expect on a trade for Von Miller?
Trying to get a gauge of this, talking to people around the league, I think they could get a first-round pick and possibly more for Von Miller based on the fact that pass rushers don't become available very often, and there's a lot of teams that need them. Last year at the deadline, Dante Fowler got traded from Jacksonville to the Rams for a 3rd-round pick and a 5th-round pick. This is a guy the Jaguars were done with. I mean, it was a low-end acquisition for the Rams, taking a flyer on a guy. Von Miller, an established guy who could impact this year's playoff race.
You look skeptical.
Yeah, I don't see it for two reasons. Number one, I don't see Von Miller getting a first, not because he's not worth the talent. Like you said, 14 and a half sacks last season. He's still a bad man. But to trade a first-round pick who could be the next Von Miller and not the next because Von Miller's a Hall of Famer, that doesn't make sense. But secondly, Greeny, Von Miller isn't really the issue or the pass rush or the lack thereof. If Denver's 22-32 since they won the Super Bowl. They have so many problems that one pick or two picks can't address. They have some foundational issues.
See, I disagree because I think if a team that's on that perennial team that's vying for the Super Bowl, who usually picks at the bottom of the first round, why not go after Von Miller? Those type of guys, like you said, pass rushers don't free up often, so he could be a critical piece for a team.
It's interesting. You mentioned Dante Fowler, who felt like they were just giving him away last year. He played a huge role in the Rams making a run to the Super Bowl.
Out.
Von Miller should definitely be able to do that. Now, I mentioned we're 2 weeks or so from the trade deadline. There were other big names here. Dan Graziano, let's look at some of them. A.J. Green, what are we hearing?
This is the final year of his contract in Cincinnati. Hasn't played yet this year, and obviously the Bengals season is going nowhere at 0-6. So teams have been calling to see if he's available. Again, Cincinnati is telling them no, but things do change as the deadline gets closer and the offers get better. A lot of teams out there looking for a receiver, most prominently the New England Patriots, and if they're involved, a lot of other teams are going to be involved.
Imagine A.J. Green on the